everybody. Incredibly unusual times. Wonderful to have our community. Great to see people from Europe, from Japan. Actually, can everyone mute their camera? I can just still see one more person. From all over the world, from Australia, from Japan. Anna, could you just make sure everyone's muting that? Thank you, everyone's great. Thank you, it's a bit distracting. And we're here really to talk about an extraordinary moment, and a moment that's going to change your organization. And also we need everyone muted, please. That's going to change your organization, and that's going to really give you an opportunity both to help people with the challenges they face now, but I think more importantly, to build for the future. The future of work is now. Now, here's how we at the Hotspots Movement, HSM, are going to help you. We're going to run a series of webinars over the next month. You'll see this obviously is today, the virtual working and families. We've chosen that as our first topic, by the way, because looking at the press, talking to family and friends, this is the issue that people are most concerned about right now. So let's deal with that today. On Thursday, on the 23rd, we'll be coming back to talk about what I think will then be a real issue, which is around virtual working and well-being. We'll be looking at leadership, virtual working and leadership on the 7th of May. And then on the 21st of May, we'll be looking specifically at collaboration. So we have a whole set of ideas for you to help those of you who are members of our community. And thank you so much for coming in this morning to really begin the whole process. Okay, I just need somehow or another. Okay, the next few weeks are going to be absolutely crucial to all of us. The disruption in home-based work is very significant, and we believe, judging both from initial work and indeed from the theory work that we have in this field, which I'll show you later, suggests that this will be significantly impacting on productivity and creativity for those of you who are working from home, especially those of you with children. And we think that you have to address that right now. What should your response be over the next few weeks? Well, here's the point, that actually you will be judged now by your actions in terms of trust and decency. And so one of the reasons we've got this community together is for you to share your ideas about how you're going to think about that. And indeed, we have an hour together today. I'm going to be talking until 10:15, and then Dr. Anna Gratton, who leads the research at HSM, will be monitoring your questions. So please keep those questions coming. And then she and I are going to have a conversation at 10:15, where she'll bring the questions forward that you've been asking. So please do, from now on, ask questions, because now we're not just, you will be judged in terms of trust and decency, but also you have an opportunity to build for the future. Now, many of us are saying, I included, that we won't come back to the same place. I think that's true. And one of the things I'm going to suggest is that we use a survey, which we will make available to you, to just get a sense of how much people think things are going to change. So let's go straight into our first poll, and let's find out where we all are. What best describes your current situation? You're still working from your workplace, you're working from home on your own. We're trying to get your sort of family situation. You're working from home, living with others, not including children. That's me, by the way. I'm living at home with my husband and my child, who was in New York, who's 30 years old, but now is back from New York. My other son is on A&E, as some of your kids are. Those of you who've got doctors in the family, I certainly do. You're working at home, living with others, including children. This is the thing where we want to ask. And you're at home with caring responsibilities. I know many of us are looking after sadly, my parents are no longer with me, but I know those of you who are younger than me are also caring for children. So could you, can you do that poll and then submit it, and we'll just take a look. So as soon as we're ready, we'll take a look at that poll. So please fill in that poll. What best describes your current situation? Okay, let's take a look at where we are. Whoa, so 68% of you are working from home, living with others, including children. So this webinar is for you because you're now empathizing with everybody else in your workforce who's doing the same. Very few of you, only 2% are still at the work. 9% of you are working on your own. Some of you are living with others, as I am doing, but the majority are at home caring for children. And this is really what we want to address right now. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the next piece. So those of you who came into my LBS pandemic webinar on the 18th of March, and if you didn't, we will send you the link to that, because that was specifically about virtual working. It was an LBS community, so we had large numbers. We had 3,000 people, and we polled them about, you know, what's your current experience? Now, this was the 13th of March, remember, this was early days. And at that stage, what I thought was really interesting is very few people were frustrated by technology. I think most of us are now, you know, pretty technologically enabled. We can work at home. 46% said they were okay, but they were missing the social interaction of the office. 25% said they loved the autonomy and flexibility. 15% said it gives me time to concentrate. 10% said I keep getting distracted by my family. My guess is if we ran that poll now, you know, a month later, where we've now had, I'm keeping a diary of lockdown. Obviously, I'm an academic. I've got to write something. I'm now, I think, day 24. So my guess is day 24, you're going to be much more thinking about both missing the office, although of course you have endless Zoom meetings, but also being more distracted by your family. Now, just to remind you that working families isn't new. You know, those of you who know my work I love to go back to the Industrial Revolution. In the 1780s, the home was a place for productivity, you know, for production. If you take a look at any of the pictures of working class families in 1780, any of the drawings of those families, you'll see the mother was spinning, often surrounded by a whole bunch of kids sitting around watching her, or the father was out in the fields. The Industrial Revolution, of course, as you know, those of you who are students of the work know that changed everything. People moved from the families into the factories. And by the way, schools also were brought in as an opportunity, really more than anything, to train children how to sit still and listen, so that they too could be ready for factory work. And part of the frustration we have, of course, about the schooling of our children is it still has that as an overriding piece, which is we're preparing you to sit down for 8 hours, not to ask any questions, and to learn quite a lot. Of course, what's happened more recently is that women have joined the workforce from the 60s onwards in enormous numbers. And of course, some of you have a sort of a dual career. So if you take a look from the 1960s onwards, that would have been a home. The home would have been a place where the man worked and the woman was a carer. From the 60s onwards, particularly the 80s, women started to join the workforce, but they mostly did a job. And by job, I mean, they didn't have a pension, they were working flexibly. And so if anything arose in the family, like this, for example, they were able very quickly to move back in and to look after the children, take domestic responsibilities. But what we're seeing, and I would imagine that many of you are in the position, and many of your other colleagues in your organization are in the position where you both now work, and you both probably, you may well both have jobs that are similar in terms of status and the sort of work that you do. Now, here's the rub. Because whilst women started to come into the workforce and indeed started to really take responsibility, actually they still took the burden of the domestic burden was still there. And this is 2011 data, but it hasn't changed particularly since then. So if you look at the 1960s, what's really interesting there is, of course, as I said earlier, men were working, and women, 1965, women weren't doing so much paid work. They were doing a lot of housework, and they were spending their time in childcare. 10% of their child was spent in childcare. Actually, one of the interesting things about this data, this is 2011 data, is women are actually spending more time in childcare than they did in the 1960s. And that's because just as technology has changed our work, it's also changed our domestic production, in the sense that we now have machines that clean the house, that clean our clothes and so on. So we're doing less domestic work. But as you can see, even when women work, they still do more domestic work and more caring than men do, even when they're in dual careers. And I think that this is really beginning to show right now. Now, of course, we also know that when women come back to work, typically they have what economists have called the penalty of children. Now, I'm sure that you and I would say that our children were not a penalty, but from an economic perspective, they certainly are. And that's because not only are they expensive to run, as you know yourself, but actually for women, their salaries go down. And in fact, every time they have a child, their salaries go down. But it's not the same for men. So when a man becomes a father, his salary doesn't go down. Now, why has that happened? Well, that's happened primarily because when men and women have children, because the women are taking more of the care, that's partly the reason. And of course, there's also profound stereotypical norms in organizations about women, about mothers at work. So those of you who are interested in inclusion and diversity, and I know many of you on the call are, this is really an opportunity to kickstart some of those initiatives that you've been wanting to get started, but have been difficult to do. This is where we are right now, that technology has enabled working from the home, that parental roles and norms are changing, and that the nuclear family, it has also begun to shift. So let's just take a look at older versus younger men. Now, this is a rather unusual sample, so I need to tell you that in advance. This is a Harvard Business School sample, and they've been asking their students for many years now about their parental roles, what it is they want to do. And I think what's really interesting is if you look at older men, and this is 49 to 67, only 16% of them are saying, I would like to do equal share. And I know that some of you in organizations, part of the challenge you've had with I&D is that the older, often more senior men don't see this as part of their norm. But actually, if you look at younger men, the younger people in your organization, they do, at least a third of them are saying, I'd like to take more equal share in childcare. And this is going to have an impact on the work post-pandemic. Because of course, what we know from research is that when men take paternity leave and spend more time with their children, they want in the future to spend more time with them. So I know we have a whole bunch of friends from Japan, and we know that they're now at home spending time with their kids, and they haven't done that before. So most of our male colleagues who are on this conference call now, who work in Japanese companies, are not used to being at home with their kids. Now, it may be, and you can do please comment on this in the chat room, it may be that you can't wait to get back to work. But my guess is a bit of you is also saying, yeah, I'd like to spend more time with my kids. And I wanted also to say that when you think about what a family is, a family has changed very considerably. In the 1960s, it was basically married parents with father only employed. That was the 65%. So that became the norm. But as you can see now, that is not the norm. That's a very unusual group. Only 22% have that sort of family structure. Most of us are in completely different family structures. And, you know, one of the things that we've used in our I&D presentations, those of you who are members of the Future of Work Consortium and came along to that, will remember this marvelous chart we showed you, where Anna and her team went through every single way we'd seen in all the literature about what a family structure is. There are 16 of them. I mean, and this is a lot of variety. Now, this is a very important point, because one of the things I'm going to say later about what might you do is to realize that you can't do a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's because there isn't one size. There is a vast variety, and that variety also is very idiosyncratic. So just to move to the end of this presentation, when I say what I think you should be doing, just remember that when I say you need idiosyncratic solutions, that's because you have an enormous variety of family types. And of course, these are extraordinary times. Everyone's impacted, and that's important, because one of the reasons we didn't move to the future of work in the way we thought we might is that only some people were impacted by the trends I'm speaking about. Now it's everybody. I mean, you've got CEOs who are sitting in rooms with children. My husband Nigel was on one of these with on a Zoom with a CEO this week, and as they were talking, their child came and sat on their lap. That would never have happened. Of course, you're also trying to educate your kids. Now, as soon as lockdown is finished, let's just hope that that no longer happens. But this is causing you enormous anxiety and stress. And indeed, you know, this is, sorry, I'm struggling here a bit because I can't always see. And the compartmentalization is breaking up. And what I mean by that is that you had a way of managing work and home, and you had a compartment between it. That's now breaking up. Let me just give you an example of how quickly norms have changed. You all remember this, don't you? It made the headline. Here was a guy speaking, I think an academic or maybe some expert, talking on the BBC. And as you can see, his children start coming in. And then his wife, who actually many people thought was with a nanny, but turned out to be his wife. That made headlines. Now, that wasn't that long ago, and this is normal now. I mean, which of us haven't been on a Zoom where our kids have run into the room? So let me just move on now to say that this is already being noticed. This is yesterday's Guardian reporting on working practice. We have people from Hitachi, Dentsu and Daiwa on this conference. So we already can see that you are already working from home, something that you've never done before, or very few of you have. Dentsu and Daiwa. Some of you know that I'm on the Japanese Prime Minister's Council on the Future of Work, which, by the way, has started again. Those of you in Japan will know that he's just asked us to start that again. And we recommended that people spend more time at home, and recommended that companies support family time and support home working. In Japan, that's been very difficult because of presenteeism, the norms of presenteeism. But you can see that this has forced companies to do that. And it'll be very interesting for you to see exactly how people are responding to that. And I'd love to hear more about that, as soon as we finish this. So I'm going to use two pieces of research and theory to help us understand what's going on. And the first piece is the theory of boundary spanning. Let me very briefly tell you a little bit about that. This is a highly researched area. And what it shows is that if you think about the roles that you have in your life, you can either integrate them or you can segment them. So an integrated role would be a role, for example, where you're a father, but you would do a job which has similarities to being a father. So the sort of things that you need to be as a father, which would be listening, caring, would be very similar to the role that you have when you're working. Segmented roles are when the roles that you have, the norms, the things that make you successful are very different. So if, for example, you're an executive focused on sales and marketing, then the sort of norms of behavior that you have doing that job, which might be about sort of being pretty aggressive, being assertive, are very different from the norms and behaviors you have as a father. So first of all, keep that in mind. So if you think about all the roles that you play, you might want to ask yourself on a 1 to 10 scale, how segmented are those roles? Now, the next point is a really important point, because the way that we manage our roles is that we put boundaries between them. And those boundaries help us move quickly from one role to another. And what I want to suggest to you is that you are now, and your employees are experiencing multiple boundaries. Now, let me just remind you where you are right now. I don't know which one of these ones you're in. I'm going to ask you in a moment with a poll. But here some of you are at home with a job. In fact, very few of you are. We've established. Some of you are at home with another person who might also be working. So you're already managing. If you're at home with a job, you're managing one boundary, you and your work. If you're at home with two of you and two jobs, you're managing the boundary between you and your partner and the boundaries between them and you and your job. So you've now got three. Now let's bring a child into the equation. So now you've got the boundaries, the children, here they are, the school, because they're not at school. So now you've got two people, two jobs, one child, one school, 5 boundaries. Let's imagine you've got 2 children, etc. You've got 7 boundaries. So some of you, I know my brother Jack is on the webinar. Hi, Jack. He's, I think, got 4 kids at home, all at different universities and school. He's managing multiple boundaries. Now, what do we know about boundaries? Well, here's the research. The research shows that boundaries are very challenging to us, that we each have roles, and the way that we create any sense of ourselves and identity is that we have these domains, that we move between these boundaries. And the way that we preserve our identity is to have transitional processes. Now, let me tell you a little bit about transitional processes. And to do that, I'm going to build 2 personas. I'm going to call one of them Charlie and one of them Zara. And those of you who know my research know I love personas. In fact, my new book, The New Long Life, out on the 28th of May, has 10 personas. Can't get away from them. Okay, so here we have Charlie. Charlie's a man, and he's both an executive and he's a father. Now, his roles as an executive and as a father are very different. So he's got a big difference between the 2 major roles that he's playing. As an executive, he has a certain norms and set of behaviors he has to have. As a father, he has another set. So how does Charlie usually manage that transition? Well, he manages it by making what scholars and researchers have called, rites of passage. So he has separated those two roles as much as he can, and he's got a whole set of rites of passage that get him from being an executive to being a father. For example, he commutes. He puts his suit on in the morning. He walks out of his home. He walks into the office. He gets himself a cup of coffee. If you ask yourself, what are your transitional roles at rites of passage, you'll see that all of you have a whole set of transitions that help you let go of one role and hold another. That's got a lot of benefits to Charlie. He's got fewer role interruptions because once he leaves his role as a father, he can concentrate on being an executive. That, as an executive, gives him peace of mind. He's what we as a psychologist would call, he's psychologically compartmentalizing. So he's actually compartmentalizing his executive role, and that means he can immerse himself very quickly in being an executive. As soon as he gets on his suit, you can see I've got my suit on, I've got my jeans underneath, by the way. As soon as he gets on his suit and goes into the office, he is now Charlie the executive, and that's very beneficial to him. There are costs to Charlie, and those of you who are Charlies know that for yourself. One is that that the psychological and social transitions that you are making are sometimes difficult because you're so immersed as an executive. If you're then interrupted as a father, you very quickly go back to immersing yourself again into being an executive. And you know that these iPhones are one of our transitional objects, by the way. Those of you who remember Piaget, that's our transitional object. So Charlie sort of made it work for himself. Well, let's look at our next example. Let's look at Zara. Now, Zara is a woman, and she's a freelancer who works at home, and she's also a mother. Now, actually, as a freelancer, she's doing caring work. She's a coach for people on the telephone. She does telephone-based coaching, and those are highly integrated roles. So she's what she is as a freelancer coach is very similar to what she is as a mother. So she doesn't need to make those massive identity transitions. And also, of course, she's at home. So she's physically in the same place for being both a mother and being a freelancer. So why does that work for Zara? Well, it means that the crossing of boundaries is simpler, and she can be more sort of limitless in how she moves. But that we know already from research on freelancers working from home that there are costs associated to that. And here are the four that you're already experiencing. Number one, the lines between her identities are very blurred. So it's hard for her to fully immerse herself in being a freelancer because she's also has an identity as a mother, which she's carrying at the same time. There's confusion about which identity she should have. There's inter-role conflict and strain. And the juggling that she does, we know from research, has a negative impact on her enjoyment and on her mood. So we know, we have enough data from how you are now to know that this is hard. So what does Zara do? Well, again, research with freelancers show that she engages with multiple elaborate rituals that help her to keep her identity. So you're already doing this, aren't you? I'm here in my dressing room. This is my dressing room, set up as my part-time studio because it's got good light. And that's now my transition. That's an elaborate, simple ritual. I make sure I always have my coffee with me. So we're all making simple rituals, which, by the way, are very idiosyncratic, to make the best of what we've got. And please do ask questions and drop comments about that, because we'd love to hear more about what you're doing. You're basically trying to do the best you can, and that's important and that's good. However, let's not get away from the fact that this is not going to work unless you, as an organization, also take some responsibility. Because most of you had 2 transitional sequences from home to work, from work to home, that you manage with transitional objects like this and through rites of passage. You now have multiple daily transitions. This is causing you stress, and you're finding it difficult. And I want to make a very important point here, is that even if you think productivity is remaining the same, I doubt it is, but even if you feel it is, we have initial data from one of my colleagues in one of the large companies that shows productivity has gone down. If you have any data, could you share that with us? Actually, we'd love to see that. We think probably engagement's going down, but again, you know, if you've got hard data on that. But I think more importantly is the question of creativity and flow. Remember that I said that one of the advantages of Charlie's segmentation is it meant that he could immerse himself in his job, and immersion, as we know, creates that sense of flow, and that sense of flow is crucial for creativity. My guess is that you're losing that. And that's bad because, of course, what you're doing at the moment is not just sorting out today's problem, but also building what will probably, for many of you, be a different type of organization later. So that's going to be important to think about that. Now, we got this last night from one of the US newspapers. And just, sorry, I've got my, which I think is a marvelous point here. This current situation almost is prophetically designed to showcase the farce of our societal approach to separating work and family lives. That's interesting, isn't it? I've talked about that in all of my books, The 100-Year Life, and in my new book, The New Long Life, I have a whole set of sections on it, some of which I'm bringing into this conversation, by the way. So, second poll is this: do you feel you're having to transition between roles more often than usual? So let's just get a sense of whether you feel you're doing what Charlie and Zara is doing, which is really moving between roles very often. So can you fill in that poll? Yes, there's a large increase in the number. There's a small increase in the number of transitions. No, there's no more transitions than usual. Of course, it'll depend on what you said to the first poll, which is why in our survey, we're going to do more correlations so we can actually take a look at subgroups. My guess is that subgroups here on today's webinar are going to be slightly different. So just tell us where you are on that. Once we finish, we can take a look at that. So, shall we take a look at poll 2? Right. Have we got the results from poll 2, Anna?
Yeah, I think that's not quite showing on the screen, but I'll just read that out to you, that it's 62% of people who say yes has been a large increase, yes. 32% yes has been a small increase, and then 4% and 2% for the final 2 results.
Okay, great. So 62% are you saying there's been a large increase? My guess is that, thank you, thanks, thank you. My guess is that that's because that's probably a lot to do with, you know, your family situation in terms of transition. So many of us are experiencing real increases in transitions. So I want to move now to the point of really talking about what might we do. Now, let me say straight away, I don't know what we should do. And if anyone knows, I should probably know, and I don't. And that's because, as I said earlier, this is very idiosyncratic. But what I'm going to make some suggestions, and then we're going to suggest how we might help you. But let me make 3 suggestions. Number 1, so these are 3 questions I think you should be asking yourself right now. Number 1, do you understand your workforce? Do you actually know who they are, what's happening to them? Number 2, are you empathizing with them, i.e. helping them realize that you understand the situation that they're in, the fact that they have these multiple transitions and so on? And number 3, are you guiding and supporting them? And I suppose those, you know, I'd sort of see those as a hierarchy from, you know, understanding to empathizing to guiding. Let's just take a look at more about this. So do you know, are you making the wrong assumptions? You know, as we showed earlier, it's very difficult to make assumptions about what people's family situations are. There's going to be an enormous amount of variety. You know, I'm sitting here with, I have stepchildren, as some of you know. They're also coming in and out. I mean, there's, you know, each of us have complex situations. So don't make assumptions or generalize about what you think somebody's situation is. Find out about, you know, do you know those people who have got caring responsibilities? And actually be careful not just to focus on caring for children, because many of us are also caring or very concerned about our parents, those of you who have parents in their 80s and 90s who are at risk. And are you reaching out and listening? Now, I know that some of you are already doing that. Again, as part of this sharing, we'd love to hear more about that. Question 2, are you empathizing with their situation? And here's, you know, just a set of ideas about how you might do that. What we know from culture change, those of you, we have some people on the conference today who are some of the world's most profound thinkers. Annie, I'm looking at you, on culture change. And you know that empathizing is really important. So, you know, acknowledging the situation they're in, encouraging them to tap into their communities. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But what the research suggests is that people will find this much easier if they're part of a community, either with people at work or people in their own network. But networks seem to be particularly important right now. And when we do our well-being webinar later on in the month, we'll be coming back to this question of networks and how important networks are going to be to relationships and to people's mental health. Are you, you know, asking your leaders to share their stories? Do they realize that they're not alone with the issues that they're facing? Do you appreciate that their experiences are going to be unique and different? It's important, we think, to invest now and to collaborate and support. So that will be my second point, which is really about empathy. But actually, of course, you need very quickly to move to the 3rd stage, which is providing guidance and support. And those of you in the I&D community can see that some of these are coming straight out of the I&D textbook, and some of them are coming out of what we know about job crafting and job sharing. So I've sort of merged those 2 theory areas to give us a bit more understanding of what we might do now. And these are again some ideas that we can talk about and we can think about. Firstly, signaling the new norms. For example, you know, if 2 people are working together at home with children, they can't work all the time, and you have to help them create a norm that says, I will be on for 4 hours a day or whatever it is, and make that a norm and create that as a way of normative behavior. Because what we're certainly reading in the press and on blogs and so on is people are very anxious about what this time is going to do for their performance. You're furloughing staff, you're letting staff go. And so this is a real time of anxiety. Are you providing guidelines and frameworks and tools? I think you should. There are tools, and we can certainly help you think more about that help people do job sharing, that help them craft their jobs? Are you connecting them with each other so they can reach out to others to ask for help? For example, in a job share situation, are you putting people together so they could share their job? Some of you know I've been an enormous advocate of job sharing for years now. Very few companies have that. We have the capacity to help you with that, by the way, for those of you who haven't already got that as a capability. Are you helping them to create a clear time boundary? Are you putting mentors and guides with them? And are you utilizing tools like job sharing? So these are some of the things that you could be doing right now. So let's just take a look at how far you think you are along that pathway. So the poll I'm going to ask you to complete now is, you're beginning to understand. So this will be, you've got to the understanding phase. The second with you're understanding and beginning to empathize. So you're actually sharing ideas and narratives. The third would be that you're starting to provide guidance and support. And the fourth would be you're actively understanding, empathizing, and providing guidance and support, or you're not doing any of them. Let's take a look at that, because there's probably some fantastically interesting case studies I think we have about 40 companies in the webinar today. So it would be great to hear about that. So could you complete that? And then Callie, maybe again, it might be easier for you just to tell us what it is if we can't see the screen.
No problem.
Yeah. And I'm going to open up to questions in a moment, by the way. So Anna, I know I can see there's lots of questions. Anna's looking at those at the moment. So I've got a couple of more things I want to say, and then we'll open up for questions. So, here we are. Okay, so some of you are on the beginning, 20% of you are at the beginning of the journey. Everybody's doing something, so that's great. Only 4% are saying we're not doing any of these. And some of you are really moving along to actively understanding. So if there's anything you're doing that you think is making a difference, we'd love to hear that. As I mentioned earlier, we have built, let me just move to the next slide. Let me just say something before I finish. As I said earlier, there's two pieces of research I wanted to bring into today. One was the research on roles, identity, and boundaries. And the second is the research on job crafting, which has been done by the marvelous Jane Dutton, who some of you might know at Michigan. She's a wonderful researcher. And she's been researching people who have been crafting their jobs, which I think is where we're getting to. I think this is an opportunity for you to help people to craft their jobs in terms of the task, the relationships, and the cognitive aspects of their job. And when she actually looked at this, she found, and this I think is really important, is that when job crafting actually works well, it is not top down. It's not a big, what it is, it's bottom up. It's a continuous process, and it's focused on quick wins. So I think we have, an opportunity here to get that right, to actually start doing some of these things and really, really making a difference to people's lives right now. So let me finish before we open with questions by just saying, what it is we at HSM can do to support you. And let me just start with the 5 areas I think we can support you right now. Number one is what we're doing right now. So we're delighted that so many people are part of our community, so many companies, and we will use, we're going to send you after this webinar some more insights we think might help. And we'll connect you with others. So on the next webinars, you'll have an opportunity to do that. We can also do something slightly more significant than that, which is that we have built a survey which looks at what's happening now. We can make that available to you for free in your organizations to find out what your employees are doing and thinking around some of the areas I've spoken about. Dr. Anna Gratton will reach out to you about that. And we will make that available to you, and we will then show you the data from all of the companies. So we'll provide you with data on people's experiences around the world. We can also, of course, deep dive into that and show you what your own company experiences are. And I think most significantly, we've decided to open up our, those of you, some of you I know on the webinar are familiar with our amazing platform where we have tens of thousands of people talking to each other. We're going to open up that platform in an ideation process so that you can do the bottom-up communication network building, which I think is absolutely crucial now. It's crucial that you do that now. We right now are working with a couple of companies at this moment who are doing that, who are going out into their workforce right now, asking, you know, what could we do? How can you help? How can we help each other? And in one case, we have 100,000 people talking to each other. In the second case, it's a much smaller ideation platform. So if that's of interest to you, please reach out to us, because we think that, I mean, I think that time is of the essence here, but then those of you who know me know that I'm always going to say that. So let's open up for questions. I can see we have hundreds of questions. Anna Gratton is going to be my questionnaire on this. Anna.
Thanks, Lynda. Yes, we've had some really interesting discussions in the chat box for the presentation. So just to give a little flavour of some of the points that were emerging, a few points around the complexity of family types, and some excellent points from a few people around single parents.
Yeah.
And the specific challenge for them. In terms of the boundary spanning, but also the exhaustion, and that well-being point has come out as well. So a few people were saying that they haven't actually seen the drop in productivity yet, but they are seeing an exhaustion among their employees. Firstly, because of the having to look at screens all the time, so the virtual components, but also the feeling of having to be always on, combined with the anxiety of what's happening externally, kind of external context. So some really interesting points coming through. In terms of questions, I've got one from Margaret from KPMG here, which is, you know, so we talked a lot about, you know, the organisation, but she's interested in hearing about what you feel the responsibility of employees is to structure their life in response to this new reality.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Shall I take that one first?
Yeah, that would be great.
And let me also just respond to the points that you've just made. The point about single parents is a very, very important point. There's been some fantastic, interesting research on discretionary time. And so discretionary time is the time that people have basically when they're not doing stuff, you know, when they can just do leisure. And there's been some great time series data which looked at people's diary entries, and they looked at who's got discretionary time. The people with the most discretionary time are two people who are working. So the people with the most are two people without kids, two working people without kids. I mean, in terms of working people, the people who have got the least by a mile are single parents. I was a single parent, as some of you know. So, I mean, totally empathize with that. Single parents are having a horrible time, a really, really, really tough time. And I agree that that's a particular group that we have to help as much as we can. I agree, by the way, with the well-being issue. That's why we do hope you can join us on our next webinar, where we're going to be looking specifically at well-being, which, as you know, is an area that we've been working on for some time. I agree about exhaustion. I'm noticing just for myself, for example, that I'm getting pains in my neck and my back that I never normally get. It's just because I'm sitting, you know, on a computer with 6 books, as we've all got 6 books, and you know, and I've got, my diary is full of webinars and Zooms, and yours will be as well. And people are getting exhausted. Day 23, people are exhausted. We've got to do something about this pretty quickly. and all, as you say, a lot of anxiety. Thanks for the point about the individual and the organisation. I think this question of individual agency is really important. I think people do want to take responsibility. Pretty much everybody is, but they're doing workabouts, you know. So an interesting theory, piece of research shows that when somebody's in a situation which it doesn't work very well, they do what psychologists call workabouts. You know, they just try and mend. And I think there's a lot of mending going on at the moment. But if you want people to mend and do workabouts which are likely to be more productive, then you have to help them to learn from each other. That's why you're noticing, you know, I've got friends on my my computer who are constantly giving me tips about, and you know, if you look, especially the New York Times seems to be entirely devoted to giving people tips on home working. So there's a lot of tips around. So I think helping people build their own communities, that's one of the reasons we love our platform, because it gives you an opportunity for hundreds of people to talk to each other about these issues. And I think we need to do that. But I agree with you that everybody has to take some responsibility and some agency. But to do that, they need you as a company to help them understand the new norms. And they need you as a company to listen to what it is, what make-arounds they're doing. And it needs you as a company to really give them tools to help them to do that. So I think the combination, you're right, it isn't just an organizational thing, but it certainly isn't just an individual thing either. Anna, any more thoughts on that, or any more questions around that?
Yeah, so we've got another question, similar in the inclusion space, which you touched on, from Caroline from Densidus, which is, what opportunities do you see or act upon to bring more equality in the virtual workplace, and then the lines between home and work are blurring?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, one of the issues about equality is home care. And it may well be that you're expecting your fathers to do more than you expect your mothers to do. That might be an implicit assumption you've got. So this would be a good opportunity for the narrative that you're using within your company to be that you expect, you know, everybody who's got families.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Sorry, somebody's just unmuted themselves. Can everyone get back onto mute? Joanne Fox, that could be you. Joan Fox, could you unmute? I'm hearing you making your coffee. Or maybe it's a gin, I don't know what time of day it is for you. Okay, so I think that the narrative you send could be a really good opportunity to make it clear that, you know, you expect both men and mums and dads to be actively involved in caring, and that you're not implicitly making assumptions. We've got early data, which I haven't actually got the hard data, but I'm hearing from research colleagues, particularly in the States, that women are more likely to be furloughed than men, and that mothers are more likely to be made redundant. So we have to be very, very careful that we're sending out the message, which very much sits within all of the inclusion and diversity work, which I know so many of you have been working on. I think this is a great opportunity, actually, by the way, to make that narrative stronger. And you'll notice that some of the slides that I use today are slides that we've used before on our inclusion and diversity work. So yeah, I think that's right. Anna, what other conversations are you having in that chat room?
Great, yes, we've got one final question from Beth from AUT.
Hi, Beth.
How we can develop practices in large organisations that support both those who enjoy the segmentation of boundary and work, that kind of clear demarcation, and those who have embraced boundary spanning and who would perhaps like to keep this approach going forward.
Yeah.
So how can we develop approaches to help both those groups?
Yeah, Beth, you ask a really interesting question there, and I think it's because you know, as I know, that compartmentalizing is also a personality trait. It's not a personality trait, but some people like to compartmentalize and some people don't. So I was going to say that in my presentation actually, but in the end ran out of, I didn't have, you know, the space with the presentation to say it. But you're right that we can't assume that everybody wants to compartmentalize or everybody doesn't want to compartmentalize. There are quite big individual differences. And if you think about what you personally like to do, then, you know, we've got to acknowledge that people are different. We've also, by the way, we've also seen quite big cultural differences there and also differences across countries. One of the great things about today is we've got big representation from Australia, Japan and Europe. And so these are very different in terms of the status issues, the hierarchies issues, the presenteeisms, and so on. So you're right that we have to acknowledge that people are going to find their own idiosyncratic way. How do we make this part of the future? Well, we make it part of the future just as we make any culture change, which is that we build narratives, we show stories, we create tools, we bring communities together to work on this. We share best practice, we make it a company norm. I mean, it's that when you think about what you do now, you should be reverting to your culture change work. And if you're interested in that, of course, we've done a lot of work in this field. We know how to manage that process. I would certainly, and I know that we're up on time now, so I'm going to finish in a moment. Let me just reiterate, we have a survey. We're going to make it available to you. Please use it if you can with as many employees as possible. If we can get data, that would be incredibly useful, and the faster the better. And secondly, do consider, you know, bringing your employees together to talk about this. I know that at the moment you're thinking, oh, we don't, you know, people don't want to go onto big platforms to talk. That's not the case. They're desperate to hear what people in their positions are feeling. And because there is so much variety, it's hard to find the person who's just like you. So you know, bringing communities together allows them to find the person who's just like them and to share experiences. So let me close by thanking, obviously, first of all, my HSM team, who are, as you know, all working from home, based all over the world, doing an incredible job. So let me first thank them for being able to do this work and put the survey together and so on. Secondly, let me thank my friends in the community. I mean, this is a webinar for our community. So thank you so much for getting up early in the morning or late at night to be on this, to asking so many questions. We're going to analyze the points you've made and we'll send you a note on that. The next webinar is later on in April, where we're going to really hit this issue of well-being, because like you, we feel that that's a really, really big issue right now. So on behalf of HSM, can I say thank you for joining us, and I hope to be talking to you very soon. Thank you.